and welcome to the Business of Data podcast. I'm your host, Catherine King, and it's a pleasure to have you join us today. In this series, we'll be speaking to senior data analytics leaders to share their experiences, challenges, and insights. Let's go ahead and dive straight into today's episode. So today's theme is all about data strategy foundations, specifically within that, the role that data governance plays in supporting advanced analytics capabilities and what data leaders can do to promote data governance processes within their organisation. Now, we couldn't think of anyone better than to come and speak about this topic than Dee Samra, Liberty Global. Dee has an extensive experience in the telecom industry and has spent the last 2 years at Liberty Global. Prior to that, she has more than a decade of experience in IT and data roles within Virgin Media, which is obviously Liberty Global's consumer-facing brand. Now, just recently, she came and spoke for us at the Data Champions Europe event, where she did a wonderful talk all about why data governance isn't a dirty word. So welcome to you, Dee.
Hi, thank you, Kat, for having me.
Brilliant. So I want to kick off straight away because there was something that one of my team members noticed, and I see it's still behind you today. You've got a little school desk. Are you homeschooling at the moment?
I am, yeah. So I have 3 young children, 3 primary aged children. So yeah, I have that struggle of trying to homeschool whilst working full time from home. So and it is a struggle. They're on half term at the moment, so they're loving it because obviously I'm still at work, so they're free to do what they want, which is what they're loving now. So yeah, I picked up these desks, the old school lift desks. They're really cute. I picked them up from school a while back. Never thought that I'd be using them for homeschooling one day. So yeah.
I think that sets the tone for so many conversations now. Is, you know, you didn't think this was coming, and I think it is a bit of a shock to everyone. And I think that moves us really nicely into what we're doing here with these podcasts and what we did with the events, is that it's so unpredicted and we've got to be really flexible to move into that. So in that theme with the event we just ran, we did this fantastic topic we created together of why data governance is sometimes seen as a dirty word and a dirty topic. Now, for our listeners, do go into a bit of detail as to why we came up with that kind of idea and why you think there is that issue.
So data governance is one of those things. It's it's seen as a policing role, I think, quite often. As I mentioned in the presentation, if you think of the word governance, you immediately think of government and rules and authority. Or you go the other way and think, oh, it's boring, it's admin, it's that kind of thing. And actually, that's what I've often faced as soon as I try to introduce myself and what I'm, having a meeting for, or being introduced to a senior business stakeholder, and I say I'm doing, looking at data governance. They're kind of like, oh yeah, boring, don't want to know, disengage. So that's kind of the immediate reaction that you get. And I try to move away from using the word governance as much as I can, really, and just focus more on just data and getting more focus on data literacy and just data responsibility around data and driving data as an asset for the business and kind of pushing it to being a bit more positive and something that someone would be more willing to talk about, I guess, or engage on.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, kind of the different ideas we have about the words. I mean, when you come up with really sexy words like machine learning and AI and all of those sorts of things, you compare that with then data governance, you do feel that there's a bit of a sigh after you say data governance. And
I think people immediately get their back up and think, oh God, they're going to come and interrogate what I'm doing. They want to know the ins and outs of everything I'm doing, and I'm going to get told what to do. And one, they don't want to change things, but two, it is seen as it's just seen as a headache, I think, rather than seeing that actually it's an enabler. It's an enabler for me to do those really cool, as you say, the sexy things I want to get into, the latest technology. But with any new technology, AI, machine learning, especially, if you're putting garbage into your machine learning, it's learning garbage, right? So you're going to get garbage out. And I think that focusing on that benefit that data governance will bring to leverage new technologies, that's kind of where you get that buy-in and get that sell to get them to actually engage on the governance side of things.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's fair to say that most organisations really struggle to really get data governance as top of the to-do list and top of people's priorities as well, and it kind of the entire workforce, not necessarily always the executive, but the workforce thinking consciously about that. Why do you think, kind of what are the top reasons do you think that the struggle is there? Obviously, you've just mentioned about it being viewed as this policing and negative change management as opposed to it being a more positive force. But what are the other things that people struggle with in that way?
So I think it's the fact that data governance as a need in a business doesn't arise as, when you think about any organization, you think about your marketing, your sales, you think about data, but you only think about the data that you're going to use.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use data to do this, or I'm going to use data to make do my analysis or predictive analysis or whatever the cool kind of data analytics that you're doing.
Yeah.
And you always think about just using it, and you assume that whatever you're using is going to be of good quality. Nobody really questions that quality. You just think, okay, yeah, we know we capture email addresses, we know we capture our customers, let's use that information to now sell or market or whatever, without actually thinking, well, hang on, who is actually responsible for making sure that that information that I'm using is trusted and good quality. And that concept isn't going to come from top down, right? So that any senior person will assume that anything that's presented to them has gone through the relevant rigor of the person who's presenting it, right? So anybody who puts a business case forward will naturally do their utmost to make sure that that they've done the numbers, they've researched, they've done all that kind of good stuff. So I think at a high level, so when they're building the business case, they'll go so far down and they'll use data, but nobody's actually looking all the way down. Where did that data come from? And actually, those fields that are being populated right down in the billing system or the customer facing, it's a CSR that's entering them, or it's the customer themselves entering that data. Nobody's really looking at it at that granular level to say, actually, what's the quality? And out of 1,000 fields, how many of them actually have been populated, or people put in some bogey numbers, don't they? Just fill it in to move on because they don't want to take the time to fill it out. And who's going back and checking that and fixing it? And that's the kind of stuff that wouldn't necessarily come top down. It's going to be something that, as I said in the presentation, it bubbles up from bottom up. It's people on the the customer facing, the front facing parts of your workforce that are going to notice these issues, and they're going to notice them on a smaller scale. By the time they become a larger scale down downstream, it's lost in between, right? And who owns that? And that's kind of where it falls through the cracks.
I think what's so interesting about what you said, and instantly this analogy just popped in my head, it's almost like sustainable eating. It's like we all know we should really care about where our fruit and veg comes from. We think of it as coming from Tesco's or Asda or Morrison's, but we don't think about the farms and the things, and we know we should, and it's only those really bad campaigns that you see and you think, oh yeah, no, I really need to change where I get it from. And it makes me think of that sort of way, because governance is viewed in that same negative way, like you need to think about where your data has come from and who's put it in. And I think that awareness is known that it needs to, but actually doing that work. And kind of moving on from that kind of area of who does the buck stop with? So in your kind of perfect world, how would you see that working, that people do stop to check each stage? So is it a case that you do go right back to the beginning, or should it work in a different way?
So probably think about the perfect world, and actually that's never going to happen, right? So but I think realistically, I mean, GDPR has come in because of this very fact, right? Because we know that people, the amount of data it's just growing exponentially, the amount of data that everybody everywhere, every organization is holding. It's just it's massive, and it's going to keep growing. And because of that, this idea that that nobody in particular is accountable for data, and as a consumer or as an individual, I don't have ownership of my own data. I don't have control of it. But as an organization, no one person across the organization is accountable for the data either. So this whole idea of accountability for the masses and masses of data that's being produced and stored and processed all over the world, it's not being addressed, right? So that's where GDPR has come in. It's a stepping stone, I guess. It could go a lot further, and I think it will eventually. And I think regulation around data will continue to increase. But certainly this first step, it's the second step after the Data Protection Act, right? But that was so long ago. This first step is really just making people think about it. It's making those execs, it's making the senior stakeholders in organizations think about it, because now somebody has to be accountable for data, and that's never had to happen before. And because the accountability is there, it starts making people question the data that they have. What data do we hold? Who's actually looking after it? Who's managing it? Where's how's the quality being looked at? And that is the first step, I would say, in getting that sort of attention at stakeholder level. The requirement for data governance has probably always been there, because, as I said, people on the ground, front facing, have always noticed issues with data, and don't have anywhere to go with it. There's no data help desk in many organizations. It's a new concept that's coming through in a lot of organizations, but it's not a broadly known or broadly used function to have a data help desk. And actually, the number of reports that are generated and the number of issues that we see, why wouldn't we have a help desk? It just makes sense. And having data literacy programs, these are all things that now we think, oh yeah, why didn't we? It's all just common sense, really. But it's come up from those two angles. One is the requirement from the ground up, and the other is this GDPR. There's a fine, there's the PR, IPR. That's what gets the attention of the senior stakeholders, and bringing that together, you end up actually being able to get that business case in there and get that support, get that engagement to actually deliver data governance. So
it's almost that perfect storm of them combining together has created that need for it. And it makes me think of, you always see it at different conferences where it says, what drove this transformation, CEO, CDO, and in this case it's GDPR a lot of the time, that was the real kick that drove this certainly into a higher level of attention. Now, just picking up on that point you mentioned about data literacy, is that something that you think the whole workforce needs to be data literate to a certain extent? Kind of from a scale, how far do you think people do need to be data literate? Does everyone need to be really proficient, or?
I think broadly, I think the whole organization needs to have some at least basic level of data literacy. At the end of the day, people need to understand that data is everywhere. I think a lot of the time you'll find that some people will think data, oh yeah, that's something that IT does. It's like, no, data is the data information that you're viewing on your screen about a customer, when you're speaking to a customer. You have access to their data, right? And understanding that, and if you copy and paste that somewhere, that is data, and you're now accountable for that data, and making sure it's not going in the wrong hands, and all that kind of good stuff. So I think it's really important across the whole organization, because it applies to everybody, whether you are customer facing or not. You could be in back office, you're still handling data. Whether you're in facilities, you're still talking about data about offices or places where people want to feel safe and secure when they go to work in an office. So that data is equally important, right? So, and I think understanding that data is data, doesn't matter whether it's about a person, about a property, or just anything. It's still data, and it could. When you look at the hardware, you might think, well, actually, we've got MAC addresses, we've got the serial codes, and we've got the information about the kit that we put in a customer's account. But on its own, it doesn't mean anything. But actually, it's linked to a customer's address, and and actually, if you put an IP address against an IP address, can identify where that person is. So it becomes critically important. So on its own, all these different data points across the entire organization, whether it's deep down in customer care, or whether it's in facilities, or it's in finance, it doesn't matter where it is. When you start joining that up, you can make a story, or it can lead you to something. So it becomes really, really important. So I think for me, there needs to be a basic level of literacy across the board. And then obviously the more specific roles where you are more involved and you have more responsibility or accountability, then there absolutely needs to be more deeper training involved to support those roles.
I find that so interesting what you're saying about data sits within IT. I think we, as humans, we love to put things in boxes, and you want to put your concerns, data, the IT guys will take care of that, and I'm going to focus on what I'm doing. And that need for data literacy can sometimes be not misunderstood, but not maybe recognised as greatly in different departments, depending on what they're dealing with. But I agree with what you're saying. A base layer across the enterprise is definitely beneficial. Now, when it comes to those touch points across a company, data touch points, and then kind of ways of dealing with it, and the silos that kind of surround those, have you got any best cases, user cases, or anything like that for breaking down those silos to make sure that data governance is being done, but also done consistently across, and it's not being just kind of left to the IT department to kind of pick up the pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that happens in every organisation. You always have certain parts of the organisation that tend to work in a silo. Maybe certain groups will work together, but some will just get left sort of satellite on the side, and maybe less forward thinking with their technology, maybe not leveraging as much of the newer technology as other departments, or as integrated with IT. So I think, again, this comes back to my data literacy point, because what we've done is create a generic data literacy program, which is a training module that actually explains what data is, but also the responsibility and the roles that are required or involved in managing data, so that actually, from a consistency point of view, everyone is having that same message. We've aligned with other areas of the organisation. So obviously there's training modules of security, privacy, that all touch data, right? Because there's that overlapping element of data involved in all three areas. So we've tried to really build on that understanding, but making sure that the message is consistent and it's the same message going to all of the same people across the organisation. So I think the more you can do that, the easier that is going to be, because it's difficult, right? Because if you do it as a one-man band, data governance going out to different areas of the organisation, every time you have a conversation, you might have relayed some or missed some, or went in a different tangent, or whatever it might be. But at least if you put out those training modules, or make some material that everybody can access, whether you're pushing it to them or they're actually coming to you for it, then at least you're being consistent in what you're messaging.
So with those training modules, have you found any resistance to doing it? Because I know, especially nowadays, people are so busy, their calendars are full of meetings and they're getting things done. And then if they don't quite see the need for that data literacy in the first place, not generalizing across everyone, do you find that you need kind of the execs to buy in and push down, or is it a case that they want this training and it's a case that resistance isn't as much?
So I think up until now it's always been an optional thing where people engage, and we will explain and give that sort of level of training, but we are in the process of making it mandatory. But again, as you said, to do that you do need that exec buy-in. You need the executive senior leadership to understand why it's important. And you need to have a story behind it. You need to have the policies to back it up, so that there's more information if people want it. You need to have the functionality in place that once, okay, I've read this data governance, or I've done my training module, now what's next? How do I engage? What do I actually need to do? And how do I go about doing it? So that all has to be there. I think I think it's important that it should be mandatory across the organisation, but I might be slightly biased. But I do think it is important. And in delivering that, you've got to make it mandatory. You have to get buy-in. So we have our internal governance councils and whatnot to make sure that when we do deliver a message and we are making it mandatory, that we have got a strong, we've got all that capability that's sat behind it. We've got the sponsorship from the exec committee. We've got all the things ticked off. So I think it's important that you be thorough, and you can't just roll out some training and hope for the best. It needs to really be part of a bigger package capability that you're building within the organization.
Yeah, and that's really, really great. And again, that's where the question kind of came from, is that are you kind of just assuming it's being done and by those that really, you know, want it, it's there as an option, but I can see you've kind of moved into that more mandatory phase, and that actually it's something that does need to be kind of pushed a little heavier than perhaps it has been. That's really, really interesting. And kind of moving on then, as I said at the start, you've been at Liberty Global now for 2 years. What have been kind of your lessons that you've learned, and if you could go back in time and say to Dee 2 years ago, what would you say when it comes to data governance and kind of that supporting of the capabilities?
Wow, so many. Okay. Oh wow. So I think the challenge. I think you've got to know your organisation well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think every organisation is different. So I was in Virgin Media prior to Liberty Global, and working in Virgin Media was very different to working in Liberty Global. And I kind of assumed it would be the same, given we're all telecoms and So I moved over naively thinking it would be similar, but it really wasn't. It was very different. So I think know your organisation, know how they work, and sort of engage in that way of thinking as soon as you can. Because I think with data governance, it's one of those things where if you don't have the support or you don't have those sponsors, you're just not going to get anywhere. You've got to really sell the message well. It has to be relevant to the organisation that you're in. And I think that can differ even within industry from organisation to organisation. It will differ, and you need to understand what that difference is and what. What will appeal to one may not appeal to the other. So that's definitely one for the business case, especially. What else? I think my main lesson, although not so much a lesson, I think the one thing that I am most pleased that I did was do my homework first. So put more effort into the planning. The first sort of 6 to 9 months of work was purely trying to understand the business and come up with that data governance framework that was going to work for this organisation, and getting that sponsorship. It was slow, and it did feel like, I'm just not making any progress, and I had a budget. I managed to get a good budget, but build a business case, got a great budget to work with, but then the progress was so slow, I didn't get time to spend it all, and I didn't move as fast as I wanted to. And you have this idea when it comes to the cool technologies. You see robotics coming in, and they put in a business case, and it was landed, and they brought it in, and it was all great, and they got on with it. And it's like, this is so slow, compared. But because it's less appealing, and it's competing for resources, as I mentioned in my presentation. You are competing against the cool growth generating, the really cool stuff that everybody wants to do. The next disruptor, the next whatever it might be for your organizations, and you are going to be competing against those things, and what you're doing is not going to it's not going to appeal to most. So you have to kind of be prepared for that. I think the aspect of perseverance, that you need to be determined and persevere, and very patient. So I think that's probably my biggest lesson, actually, for me personally, is being patient. And if those who know me from my Virgin Media days know that I was not the most patient. So this has been a big lesson for me.
Yeah. And so when I'm thinking of the questions that arose during your presentation, and one that we didn't quite get a chance to answer was, how do you deal with it when you perhaps haven't got the most executive support that you could get? Obviously, there is that theme and tone of GDPR, and that very real need to have it, but then there's no kind of added on extra to kind of push that initiative. What would you suggest to anyone kind of starting out on that journey, or within that journey, and they're not quite getting that executive buy-in? Are there any kind of ways or case studies that you could share with us to kind of help those people with that issue?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, when I first started this journey, I was sort of lobbying to do data governance, but I was lobbying in Virgin Media at the time. And like I said, that organisation is very different to Liberty Global in a lot of ways. And so what appealed there was very different. So I had built this really big business case of demonstrating return on investment. And that's one thing that they kept on at me about, was return on investment. We just want to know so what, and I'll have data governance, and then what? So it's like, it was really, really important that I built this picture of actually you're going to save money. Show me how. And go in and find those use cases and demonstrate that had you had data governance, you wouldn't have had to deal with this issue, this issue, this issue, and it would have saved you X, Y, and Z. So in just that one financial year with these 3 to 6 use cases, this is what you would have saved if you'd had data governance. And data governance to implement, it would have cost you around this. There's the numbers. So that's your numbers guy kind of approach. But actually, Liberty Global obviously is very interested in numbers. They're more of a merger acquisition type organization. But actually, as the holding group for multiple brands, we've got Virgin Media in UK and Ireland, we've got UPC. At the time when I moved across, we still had Unity Media in Germany, and we've got fingers in lots of pies basically. And actually, as a holding group, that governance side actually is really, really important. Right?
Yeah.
So, they are ultimately accountable for all of these different brands. So I think the whole argument around GDPR certainly worked really well. And I know peers and friends that have spoken, especially in banks, it's not so much about the monetary value, it's that governance and adherence to regulation and compliance that is one of the key drivers. You just need to know who your audience is and tailor your argument, tailor your business case. Your business case doesn't have to just be numbers and financial gain. It very much can be just the governance aspect, or just doing the right thing, or I don't trust my numbers and I'm making business decisions off it. A lot of the time we've had some senior stakeholders say, everyone's got this gut feeling that the data isn't right, or that there's garbage in, garbage out. That phrase is there across every industry, because we all know it's the truth, right? That there is a lot of garbage in a lot of systems, and therefore a lot of the analytics and the reports and things that people are making key business decisions on are going to have an element of garbage to them. We just don't know how much. And without doing data governance, you can't address that. And often that is enough to get the buy-in. And that certainly worked for me with quite a lot of my key stakeholders. So I think you just need to, like I said before, know your audience, understand what drives them, and tailor your business case or your buy-in message accordingly.
So find out that story via research and then speak to that story and be genuine to it, I suppose. Don't try and speak another language because that's how you've heard it in another conference being explained. Because as you say, if the numbers game doesn't quite work and it's not going to resonate, there's no point in trying to speak that story necessarily. That's a really great kind of point to finish this discussion on. But I'm keen to know, we started out the discussion by saying that you're currently in the midst of homeschooling. What are you looking forward to when all of this is eased and we're in a better place? What's going to be your number one to do when it's all over?
Number one, I think it's going to be eating out. I'm tired of cooking.
Any particular type of food or restaurant?
Oh, I think there's a long list going on. So the kids miss the usual, I think they just miss their pizza pastas. Obviously, we do buy it in and make it. We tried making homemade pizza and they're like, this dough doesn't taste the same. But no, for me it's probably more the things that are trickier to make at home, I guess. So and things that when you go to a restaurant, right, I can order what I want and the kids can have the same old boring food, whereas at home that means cooking 3 different meals, right? So I'm looking forward to that, where we can just go and eat somewhere and the kids will be happy and I get to have something different that they wouldn't know. Like we normally, when we go Italian, it's risotto for me and then it's pizza pasta for the kids, but to cook that at home would just take too long.
Much nicer to have someone else do it, I think.
But definitely getting out to the seaside as well is top of their list. So I grew up on the beach, so I'm desperate to go up north and go to the beach. So that's
fantastic, and hopefully we'll be there really, really soon. Thank you, Dee, for joining us today. It's been fantastic speaking to you, and we'll see you real soon.
Thank you, Kat. Speak to you soon.
Wow, I always adore chatting with Dee. I just love the key things we were able to pull out during that discussion, from the perception people have about governance through to the training, literacy and help desk ideas as well. Also hearing more about Dee's career and her key learnings from her journey and her top tips that she was able to share with us. As always, join us again for more fantastic conversations on the Business of Data podcast. Do be sure to follow us on socials and subscribe to the Business of Data to be the very first to receive our latest content. Until next time, stay well. See you soon.